Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel workshop, Becoming a Modern CIO. I'm Nasheen Liu, Managing Partner with the IT Media Group, a CIO-centric media company. I'm so glad you can join us today, and more are joining as we speak. I want to thank Pythian for their support. In the next hour, we will be exploring a trending topic with an awesome panel. This is a topic designed for senior technology executives, aspiring leaders, and tech vendors who want to gain actionable insights and build in-demand skills to stay relevant. In today's fast-paced technological world, the expectations for the role of the IT leadership are rapidly evolving, demanding a different set of skills and strategies to lead the technology portfolio. A modern CIO must approach the business of IT differently by being a savvy and intentional communicator, a trusted advisor, not just to the C-suite and the board, but also to all levels of the organization. A modern CIO must have the foresight, credibility, and influence to enable a digital enterprise, while in the same time mindfully cultivating the next generation of diverse talent pool. A tall order indeed. This is why we're here today to explore essential skills and strategies CIOs use to succeed in the modern world. You will walk away with some practical insights that you can apply immediately. We will also be sharing important links to resources and reminders through the chat window. And lastly, attendees will be receiving a report covering the insights from today's discussion. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator, Paul Lewis. Paul is the Chief Technology Officer with Pythian. In his career, Paul has been a CIO and a CTO on both the client and the vendor side. Paul is passionate about leading technology innovation and advocating for the impact of technology on business, especially related to digital transformation and social innovation. Welcome, Paul. The mic is yours to introduce the panel and kick off the discussion.
Thank you, Nasheen, and welcome, everyone. We know you have many options for IT Media Group virtual workshops, and we're glad you joined ours today. I'm, in fact, joined by John Comacchio and Julie Hansen, and we have one heck of a show today, dancing bears and all. We're going to talk about this interesting, deep, modern CIO topic in 4 parts. We're going to talk about the modern or current expectations of a CIO and even what the future might hold. We're going to talk about the digital enterprise, digital transformation, and what it means to orchestrate that within the new role of the CIO. We're going to talk about communication, down, sideways, up, and how that has changed over time and what new skill sets are required. And we're going to talk about talent. What new expertise, what new skill set, what new people, what new diverse thinking is required, what kind of programs need to be put in place to support everything above. So why is this discussion so important? Because we think there's a problem. Well, we have a few problems. There's a gap between the skill set of modern CIOs and the next in the ranks. There's an expectation of current CIOs that were never there in the past. And the longevity of CIOs, well, they were already short to begin with, and now they're a little shorter. Let's jump into our first topic, modern expectations of the CIO. We have a thesis, and we'll get into it with the questions. We have a thesis that the role of the CIO has changed in a very short period of time. We're talking about 5 years, 6 years. Change might not be the real word here we intend. We might mean widen or extend or broaden. Really, more is being asked. Because the reality is all the nitty-gritty of IT, the traditional role of red, green, yellow projects and blinking lights in the data center and keeping the data safe and care and feeding of the technologists itself, that still remains. They've asked more of us. Even if 84 to 86% of IT spending is controlled outside of IT, it's still IT delivering on those projects. So let's jump into the first question. And Julie, I'm going to ask you first. 5 years ago, what was the role of CIO versus what it is today?
5 years ago, when I worked with assorted CIOs and companies in general, I've seen it as a very traditional type of role that's very operational focused. There's a very specific set of responsibilities and ways that communications happen in order to be efficient and effective and to make sure everyone has the tools in place and the company is running from a technology perspective. That goes back quite a few years beyond. But I think what's most interesting is what I've seen in the most recent 5 years, this evolution towards more of a business type of role. So more of a strategic role, more awareness around finance and what's going on with the company in general, and an evolution to be much more involved with the ELT, the executive leadership team, than in past years. And that's been happening, like you mentioned, I've seen it happening pretty quickly in terms of the evolution, almost so much so that I think it's catching some organizations off guard and some individual leaders off guard, just with the pace of change, the expectation of customers, and the adoption of more technology quickly, that where the responsibility is coming to the CIO. What I'm seeing now is a lot more of an expectation of the CEO to lean on the CIO, to lean on the IT organization to be in lockstep from a digital perspective because of the pace of change.
John, you share that? Is those the kind of changes that happened in the last 5 years?
Very much. I echo exactly what Julie's saying. I think the CIO generally in the past has been dictated by technology over time. So if you go right back to the mainframe, right to today's cloud, they were really leading the enterprise through adopting and adopting those technologies and really kind of that focus on the operator, keep the lights on, as Julie mentioned, the technologist, which is a bit of the evangelist to the degree they could be the evangelist, the strategists around how they partner with the business, and also the catalyst to lead disruption. But all again driven by the technology over time. But versus today, the roles evolved much more to be outward focused, as Julie mentioned, to talk more outward to people. And they have to be, the CIO today has to be more informed and has to have a very informed opinion of the business and a much deeper understanding of the business than they possibly had in the past. And I think the key around understanding the business strategy is so that they can really set the roadmap from a business point of view and educate their peer group and the CEO around that roadmap and how it's tied to that business strategy. They need to be heavily involved in operations so they understand the processes that happen in the business, because you can't fix and or improve or speed up processes and innovate processes unless you really understand them. So I think that deep knowledge around the business flow and business process is very key. And they can take that knowledge and their technology knowledge and their thinking to the boardroom table. And they can discuss openly those opportunities and contribute to enterprise-wide decisions. I think that's really the key. So I would say that the multidisciplinary background they need today is around business prowess, definitely around leadership prowess, because you have to be a leader to be at that table to speak around the business. You have to be an educator. As Julie mentioned, a lot more discussion, the CEO leaning on you, help me understand this. That education piece is very important. You have to have technical prowess. I mean, you can't ever give that up, but not as deep as might have been necessary in the past. You have to have data acumen because it is a data world. Of course, cyber compliance, privacy, people look at us to do that, even though it really is a business or corporate piece, but why not own it? Because we know more about it and we control the data that is covered and coveted by everybody. And of course, having that strategic vision.
That was a lot. Good thing they've given us 30 hours per day instead of 24. Gives us a whole extra quarter to worry about it. So Julie, that was a mouthful. There's a lot of change that happened both in time and energy and focus and what I had to learn and what I had to know next 5 years. So if we look closing in the end of 2030, what will change by then? What new skills will I have? What is the refocus of the CIO, or even what new role or title might they have?
That's such a far way off to predict. Nobody does those types of long predictions because we never know what's coming. And what John said, super exciting, I think, like in terms of some of the different ways that this job is evolving. I guess one way I look at it, and by the way, in my role, I speak with a lot of CIOs, but a lot of leaders in general. And so I'm seeing different changes and perspectives depending on the company, the individuals, et cetera. And I think one thing that will change is the team that the CIO will have to put in place, some of the skill sets. So it's not going to all fall on that individual, but it will fall on that individual to think about the dynamic nature of the team that's going to be able to support the business going forward. What kind of innovation, what does the culture look like? How are they affecting the culture within IT and the business as well? What kind of communications are going to be coming out of there? And what is the constant learning that leader, a CIO, is going to have to think about for themselves, but also for the team and adjacent teams as well? Because some of the roles that I'm starting to see evolve are, as many of you would know, like there's chief digital officers out there, and they reside in a number of places. Sometimes they report into IT, sometimes they report into marketing, sometimes they're out on their own. And the reason why, I think, also varies. In some cases, it's perceived that IT stays status quo, but this is like the new group thinking about digital and some of the newer innovations. Sometimes it's the inability to change quickly, so it's easier to bring in a team versus evolve a team, which can be frustrating, especially for the existing teams. I've also seen some roles like a chief technology officer, which has been around for a while, but taking on more of a leadership capacity with larger companies, CIOs reporting to that person. So there's a few different ways structurally that I'm seeing companies evolve because of the amount of responsibility, creativity, problem solving, business strategy, all the things that John mentioned that are coming quite quickly to a company. So I don't know, and I would say the best skill set to evolve in a company is the ability to learn quickly and apply, and also the ability to unlearn where possible, realizing that some of these technologies won't go away for a long time, and there's responsibilities that will stay regardless of how many new roles come along. But because we can't predict the future, you have to have an agile skill set and mindset.
Yep. So beefy base here, in summary, it's changed dramatically, the role in the last 5 years. While we can't predict the next 5 years, we know it will in fact require change. In fact, might change the role entirely from CIO to chief digital to COO, depending on the type of organization you are. I heard compliance, I heard different role, I heard different title, I heard different communication style, I heard different digital, all interesting, valuable things. Let's move on to our next topic, but let's start with a poll. Let's bring up the poll. So it should pop up for you. I'll give you the quick here. So IT organization, we're going to talk about the difference between sort of the traditional cost center model or the modern innovation model within IT. Pick one, press submit, and we'll talk about the results as you go through it. We'll give you, 5-10 seconds to make that true. So traditional model, cost center, cost efficiency, usually working for the CFO, looking for, savings or innovation, or I want to create new value for the organization, maybe sitting at the table of innovation, the digital transformation side. Okay, let's look at the results. 50-50. That's interesting. In fact, valuable, even if it's interesting. So if we were to look at this 5 years ago, it would be much more traditional cost center and less innovation. I would argue that the next 5 years, it's going to be more innovation than cost center. So we're halfway in between. This transition kind of is how I'm reading this. Topic 2 is going to be about orchestrating this digital enterprise. So one of the new roles we just identified in the last conversation was the need or requirement or mandate to orchestrate the digital enterprise, or in other words, lead the digital transformation set of initiatives, or even just lead the digital team, whatever that might mean, depending on the industry. Of course, the industries differ by maturity and different industry and different purpose and different goals. You might exist to find new customer segments, or you're looking for inefficiency for inorganic growth. But most businesses would need to sort of crawl and walk and run, right? They want to test the waters. They want to implement the easier, smaller fruit that they can grab from the tree and then do the more complex, more costly, more time-consuming implementations. But DX isn't just an IT requirement, right? It's the ultimate team sport. I require multiple parts of the organization, but most of it is implemented underlying via technology, which means the CIO had to take a much bigger, important role. So back to Julie, how does the CIO coordinate across all of the organization, all those initiatives? How did they do that? How is that possible?
Well, they're not really doing it alone. The CIOs that I see really being innovative and strategic in the company, they're very much in lockstep with what the CIO or the CEO's goals are. And that's not always been the case in the past, but that's basically saying, what are the goals of the company? How do we want to grow? A lot of organizations are really using digital transformation and initiatives to focus in on their customer and keep their customer a lot closer to them. And so a lot of the digital initiatives have to come out of thinking through it from a design thinking perspective in lockstep with the business. I just came out of a conversation yesterday where the IT department was frustrated with some of the data they couldn't get to and how the business just wasn't cooperating. And it was really clear to me that there was a communication challenge between what one side was saying or one group versus the other in terms of what was important and how to get there. And so there has to be a lot of communication, planning, and also ability to think through how to do something small and grow it. So another organization, in order to be more innovative and to be in line with some of the digital things they want to accomplish, they're starting with an MVP, a small project, but it's to get the buy-in of the business. So the business will be more accepting to sharing more information so that can grow. So there's been some really interesting projects coming along with different sizes of companies where in order to be digitally transformative, you have to have a certain focus. And the one that's closest to revenue is to have your customer at the center and then to think around that as a team. And another relationship that needs to grow is with marketing. And so that could be like the far side of where IT thinks they need to go. But there is a trend coming as far as who owns the data in a company. And it's interesting, the different answers I've heard from different companies, but there's this perception that in the future, another title might be Chief Growth Officer. And who owns that? CMOs are growing in their power in terms of they're creating some of the most important data that is being personalized for customers and consumers, B2B and B2C. And so a relationship that's key to digital transformation is very much to be in line with marketing as well. So there's a lot to be done. I think it's super exciting how the role is evolving, but you have to think through, like, how do you build those relationships with these other leaders?
So you've named names. You throw some CMO and COO and CFO. John, who's the most important of those?
Well, the CIO, of course, right?
but of the CIO peers, who's
Well,
the next relationship you should build?
So I think, like, to Julie's point, I mean, right now executive teams are quite spread across a CXO type of organization: chief manufacturing officer, sales officer, marketing officer, etc. We're going to add to that world with digital data, compliance, privacy. It goes on in a good way. But at the end of the day, there has to be a cheerleader, and I think the CIO can help drive the transformation towards business growth, towards CX, towards employee experience increases, towards efficiency and effectiveness. I think that's one of the keys. And you've got to be able to translate that business vision through the use of technology. And you're going to need your peers to partner with you because they have to buy into that technology and they have to actually free themselves of their current silos and realize that the ecosystems that they're going to cross to make this transformation effective has to tie in all data horizontally versus in a vertical silo.
So John, does DX mean big I innovation, but small I innovation within IT or smaller initiatives still the mandate of the CIO?
Well, I would say that really moving those innovations through the business will require the CIO to be the champion and to really do the translation of how this is going to work. And also because we look horizontally through the business, we know where the data gaps are. We know where the process gaps are. We also understand where the capabilities lie, either strong or weak within certain groups that will hinder this. Because again, passive resistance is one of the biggest issues around digital transformation. I like things the way they're running today. So I think that's really key. But that partnership and that leadership and education of your partner constantly is what's really going to drive these initiatives forward. And I think the small I POCs really shed light on the ability of technology and how it can transform people's thinking. It also allows you to sort of bring attention to some of the new generations in the workforce that are looking for that kind of technology and want to embrace it and work on those projects. So you can find future leaders within there as well. So I think the small I is very important, but the big I is key to revenue growth, as Julie pointed out. And I think the budget has to be held at the executive level, not in the IT budget, which a lot of times traditionally it is. And in our company, we've always held the innovation budget at the executive level because we're accountable and we manage it. And when everyone knows it's held there, they report up to that group.
Right.
Not only the accomplishments, where we are and where we're winning, where we're losing, and how much we're spending. So,
and of course, the bright part there is $100 million IT budget becomes a $200 million IT budget, because now you're adding, in many ways, IT and OT, operational technology or innovation technology together. Julie, you had a comment?
I was just gonna say, like, I think the CIO role is exciting. I think it's really evolving in a cool way. There's so many ways to look at it, but ultimately what I'm seeing from CEOs is they are really wanting to lean on technology because they look at digitization as the future to what their business is going to be with their customer. And so even though chief marketing and finance are going to have their say in terms of wanting to support the budget, it's really going to come down to a trust component with the CIO being able to understand what's coming, what do they need to put in place, how to leverage it, how to also continue doing some of the traditional things that don't go away. So, I think the stress level can go up as well, which goes back to like, what do you surround yourself with from a talent perspective and how do you learn so that you can grow into the role?
We're going to get to talent. It's our next topic. But what I heard was in this topic was the CIO might be the new chief digital officer. It might also be the new chief data officer. CIOs need to coordinate innovations across IT to include all parts of that business. We talked about CMO and COO and CFO and all of the other Cs and SVPs and EVPs. And we still have challenges like change management and detailed appreciation of business flows, and all of that complexity still exists. Right. So let's move on to our next topic. Next topic is, how's your IT organized perceived by your company? That's our next poll. Let's bring that up. Okay, so everybody gets to make a multi-selection here, which is great. If you look at your IT organization, the perception, how either your IT folks within IT perceive IT, or how the external organizations perceive IT, would they see them as managing infrastructure, providing innovation, creating business value, delivering applications, one or all of the above? And given the last poll where it was 50-50 of cost efficiency and innovation, I'm thinking we're going to see some data all over the place. But put your selections in and press submit, and we'll see what the answers are. And we'll have a quick conversation on it.
Looking forward to this one. Drum roll, drum roll.
We have the results coming. There we go. Yeah, as we expect, it's kind of a mixed bag, but it is interesting that there's still a pretty heavy shift on managing infrastructure and delivering applications and security and risk. So IT of IT hasn't gone away. It's still a requirement and necessity, lesser so on innovation and create business value and collaboration, but still 50%, right? So still a pretty big mix, which is helpful for the going forward. Okay, topic 3. Let's talk about communication. So we started about saying that the role is different. Then we talked about digital transformation, how we have to engage sort of the broader organization. But let's talk about communication specifically. Now that we have to engage in that team, the CIOs need to take on a much broader mandate. They need to interact across the organization, up through the board, engage with external stakeholders like investors and bankers and lenders, and they have to continue to stay relevant in IT. They have to create and maintain the trust of their organizations themselves, and not just inside, but the IT communities. You engaging in this workshop is engaging with the community, and us talking about it is engaging with the community. And communication becomes that key skill set. You have to be able to have a conversation to appreciate what changes I need to implement. It might, in fact, be the key skill set going forward, but it's not a generic set of communication skills. We have to think about things like trusted advisor. That has to mean something. So if it has to mean something, John, what does it mean?
I think a trusted advisor, first off, persuasion and influence
Mm.
comes in a lot around trusted advisor, right? Because you are educating, you're persuading, you're influencing, and you're building understanding of what really has to happen next. And I think that's that trusted advisor. And you also have to be able to, and I mentioned before, explain the capabilities or lack of capabilities within the organization. Because if the organization is not ready, then you've got to get it ready. So sometimes you have to do some groundwork. You have to look at your source of truth of data and actually build it up before you actually undertake a data analytics project and transform that way. So I think that's very, very key. So I think the leadership part is very key. The communication part is very key. And also I think part of the trusted advisors, we partner very well. We have always had lots of vendors. And we've always learned to partner with vendors. We've also learned to partner with people who drive innovation, like startups, universities, et cetera. Very few organizations within companies do that better than we do. And we always look at negotiations as a communication, not a confrontation. So I think that trusted advisor brings that advice into today's world, which I think is really, really key.
And Julie, you spent a good portion of your time being a trusted advisor to CIOs. What makes a perfect trusted advisor? What makes you the best at what you do, Julie?
Well, I've got some superpowers, Paul. One of them is deep listening. Often, you really have to understand your customer. And as a CIO, who is your customer within the organization? And what can you learn from them so you can do your job better? I spent a lot of time asking very curious questions of CIOs or any executive who I work with, because I want to understand where they're coming from. There's a huge psychology behind it in order to really capture a perspective different than your own. The worst thing you can do is to walk in with your own opinion, or to have a fear of change, or to go in there thinking, okay, I'm going to listen, but I'm really ready to tell these guys or girls or folks that this is the way it is, because of budget and things like that. And so being curious, asking questions, and if you're uncomfortable with it, because this goes back to what do you need to know in the job from a business strategy perspective? What's your CEO thinking? What's the role of marketing? Is it what you really think it is, especially with digital? Is to also give yourself some education. Build a network around you of other people you can ask, like John, to say, hey, how are you approaching this? Or is there something that you went out and learned, or something that you unlearned so you could be more open to a new approach as a trusted advisor to your leadership team? Just don't try to figure it out on your own, because that's super key to asking the question. So if you need to have a better background in finance to talk to the CFO, go out and get that, and then you can approach it in a different way. As an advisor, I transitioned over to advising a lot of manufacturing companies. So there are things that I needed to understand, and I went out and learned it so that I could spend time with a CIO of a manufacturer that's building big machines, and to be able to be comfortable understanding like what their pain points are. And then, of course, when I'm talking to someone on the business side, where's the growth coming from? What do you need? Because they really want to digitize the solutions for business value. So one of the things I see weak in a lot of companies is the ability to think about it from a value perspective. What is the business value to what we're doing? And what are the goals and the metrics the company's aiming for? And then how do I insert digital technology and support and talent, et cetera, and stay cost efficient while we're all moving towards that goal?
So trusted advisor requires not only knowledge of the business, but to keep up to speed with what's happening externally to apply that knowledge internally. Which,
yeah,
John,
because we also, I'll just say, like, you can get really futures happy as well and go, oh my gosh, here comes
Right.
GPT, right? And everyone's like, woo, here's the latest thing. But you are expected to know a little bit of that. Of course, you can have people around you to help with that, but you fundamentally are in lockstep with the CEO to grow the business around what the customer wants.
Right, John, which makes me think that it's not just the executives that matter as a trusted advisor, but the workforce in general. There's IT graduates joining your team. There's hundreds of thousands of people working in the operations of business, multiple generations, diverse geographies, diverse cultures, 24 time zones. That's a lot of change. Like, how do you deal with that multi-asterisk?
Well, I think to the point that Julie said, first of all, if you're going to be a change agent, you have to be comfortable being a change agent and not just understanding the potential of technology, but actually bringing it to life and talk to your constituents, as you said, right? I think never stop listening and learning, because when you walk through your constituent base, be it manufacturing, be it sales, be it marketing, be it product development, there is a digital component to absolutely everything that we do and that they do, and they have opinions. So they can tell you what's working, what's not working, and what should be fixed, what should not be fixed. Now, when you dig deeper, because of what we do, we find out there's data missing, or these ecosystems aren't aligning. There's no ingress or egress API right down to detail levels, right? But I think that learning piece and talking out to your peers and outside people and learning, and you have to be out there all the time. You have to talk to startups. You read about something interesting, you call them up and you understand, what are you doing? How does this work? How would this fit? And it's a never-ending job that way, but it's a great job that way. Because again, you're actually trying to be topical to drive that value that Julie said. And if we're not driving value, we're not doing our job.
And Julie, just on this multi-asterisk, does that mean more different repetitive communication? How do you have to deal with hundreds of thousands of potential people in your organization?
I think it has to be thoughtful. I think there's some communications that should change. I don't think you should be piling it on. When you think about listening to your customer, when you're going to be innovative and you're going to make a new product, you ask them what they want. And when it comes down to communications, I think that style should also be created as a group to be effective. Otherwise, you could be putting people in a communication storm that's actually going to turn ears off versus having people more open to you. But I also think that there should be a way in all that communication to collect multiple perspectives and to be really open to that. So you're going to have a workforce of many different types of people, which is super fascinating for diversity of thought. And so I think you should be open to having some formats for listening and deep listening, where you can capture a lot of ideas coming from parts of the business and external, and think of a way to organize that stuff. So you can think about where it falls under certain business priorities and where it could be an innovative idea for change, and where there's risk on it as well, because you might need to practice your skills in taking some risk.
Right.
So there's some organization around it for sure. So it's not just a bombardment of a lot of communication, no action.
So not only is it potentially diverse communication, but it's active listening. I need to be able to hear and accept and change me as much as they need to hear and accept and change themselves.
I've seen that as a barrier many times. When I see a company that's not transforming, that is not moving forward with speed, some antiquated thinking and a fear of taking risks and doing things differently is behind it, and a bunch of roles. I'm not saying it's just the CIO.
Let's move to another topic, because we're clearly running out of time. All right. So final topic, final poll. Let's bring that up. Okay. Digital skills readiness. So single choice this time, not multiple choice, because we're going to get into a conversation specifically about finding the right people, talent. So what's the most important talent problem in your organization? Is it finding the right people externally, adding the skill sets to your team? Is it promoting the right people internally? Is ensuring that your organization, your hierarchy has the diversity that you think is required? Is it finding partners that has unique or niche capabilities to which over time will add to your team? Or is it finding partners to create scale, right? Is this the team 2, the team B, where instead of doing 2 small I innovations, I can do a dozen small I innovations and 3 big I innovations. Is which part of this is most important for a problem to which you need to solve? And we see the results kind of spread again. It's still finding external people, it's finding or promoting internal people, less so maybe with niche skill sets. And I think what you'll find, at least when I hear out in the market, when I'm trying to do something new and I have the expertise but don't have the experience, that's where I need to find sort of unique partners. And then, of course, scale if I want to do more than one thing. But let's jump into this particular topic. So we talked new and changing roles, which includes sort of a new mandate to innovate through transformation, which in turn creates new outcomes for communication strategies. But for who? As much as the CIO is changing, so is the team beneath them, or even across from them. They have different peers potentially. And as much as the business is evolving, so is the expertise and experience of the team that has to achieve those goals. Finding talent becomes a problem. It might be externally because you have a far diverse ecosystem of partners. It might be data partners or technology partners or talent partners. I might need to find expertise to determine what a junior, senior, intermediate data scientist needs to look like. Internally, we might need to create a different succession program. Succession might be one of the bigger cultural gaps in our organization right now. Or they're looking to simply highlight or create new skill sets from scratch. So question number 1, we'll start with John. What are those new skills required? And what are the new roles to enable that digital enterprise?
Well, I would start with the institutional knowledge really runs most companies. So having people stay within and upskill is very key. So I think it's time to rethink job descriptions in the digital era and make them more project-based, make them more outcome-based, make them specialty roles that are very fluid. Move from AI to RPA to all of a sudden now, the repeatable tasks are all taken care of, and you can actually help drive revenue growth by taking your knowledge, process innovation, and your knowledge of how the company runs and where else you see it. So I think that the flexibility around jobs to make people specialists in a fluid way, outcomes-based, and all based on effectiveness, CX, and employee experience, and revenue growth tied to. I think that's the key. Very, very fluid jobs. I think we have to sort of get away from these silo jobs, processing jobs, and this is your distinct role, because people have to look horizontally across the organization and should work horizontally across as well.
And Julie, how do we go from 0 to 100 to that? Like, those are skills that I might not have, expertise that I may not have acquired organically. Well, how am I creating these roles? How am I creating the skill set?
You aligned it to like future business values so you can justify whatever ways you want to go about it, is tying the skill sets to the outcomes that the business wants. And if that doesn't happen because of budgetary, it will slow things down because it'll force you to think about how to do more with less, which is actually happening right now. So that's a very realistic thing. And sometimes some of the ways to accelerate is to put people in a place with a mentor and put them into something new, because sometimes the fastest way to learn is to get out of the comfort zone and put someone there. I would also encourage really having your leadership know what your existing teammates are interested in, because one of the things I've noticed is a lot of people don't always want to speak up around a project or something that they want to get into for, I don't know, assorted reasons, maybe a fear that their manager wants to keep them where they're at, or there's just isn't a space. But each person should really be empowered to be able to say, hey, I want to try something, and to think about the culture to encourage a culture of failure and learning in combination.
If I could add, Paul, to that the CIO's role is to transfer digital skills into the operating departments. When we move to adopt a SaaS cloud, it's your cloud, own it. Traditionally, a lot of IT departments hold that ownership. Not at all. It's yours. You admit it. You own it. We'll API to move around, and we'll work with you. And that's another way to develop those skills, because you inherently start building those skills. And the projects, of course, that everyone works on, people should come out of a project with a new role, not go back to their existing role, because they've learned a lot and they're changing their thinking.
Which makes me think of a 2-part question, and I'll ask both of you your thoughts. Given I need to add new skill sets and new expertise, and arguably experience is more important than expertise. I can have an individual learn a skill set, learn Java in 21 days, but having done it 100 times becomes interesting, which means partnerships become important. So twofold question. What partnerships are needed And then what skills and or roles is best suited for external consumption versus internal promotion? Let's start with John, then we'll go to Julie.
I think anything that's outcome-based has to be internal. And anything that's process-based could be staff augmentation. And eventually you're going to automate that and eliminate that. And just keep that skill set, keep that institutional knowledge growing internal. You keep the skill set growth internal and create that career pathing. Then people won't leave you.
Awesome. Julie.
Sometimes you got to go external in order to just get things done in a certain capacity when you don't have a skill set in house and you have a time constraint. One of the things that should change about doing that, though, is the commitment when you're doing that kind of consulting approach with a partner, let's call it that, is to make sure there is a transference. There's somehow someone is starting to pick it up internal so that you can become self-reliant if that skill set needs to stay in-house longer term. That's obviously where you see consulting partners come in all the time to do different types of implementations. But it's also where I see when they leave a lot of weakness in companies in ways of being able to maintain and continue to grow a solution digitally to support the business. And so that change management, the skill piece, the ability to do that transfer is an area that needs to be improved if you're going to use partners as part of your skill set solution.
That was a deep section, and now we've come up to the time where we start to take Q&A. We actually have several questions, which is great. If, as we're going through these three, if you have more questions, feel free to throw them in the question and answer part. But what I heard just now, deep thinking. We heard we need new capability. That means we need new roles, which might mean we need new people that would be put in those roles, or it means reskilling, upskilling the existing people we have to take on new capabilities and have new skill sets. On the other side of that, there might be specific roles or skill sets and capabilities that we need externally, partnerships, and we need to determine within your organization what makes the most sense. Is it because I want to add a niche skill set, or it might be because I want to implement team 2, team B, right, at scale, which is good. So let's jump into these questions. I like this first one. This is amazing. And both of you jump in them. What is the most significant risk to the role of the CIO? And let's give that a dimension today and a dimension tomorrow. So Julie, the most significant risk to the role of CIO today and tomorrow.
First thing that came to mind when I heard that is not evolving. If you don't change with the business needs because it's changing drastically, you will be replaced. They will bring in another role above you. If you want to keep doing what you're doing, that could be one thing, but the whole role and the business is evolving. So you need to know how to evolve.
John, most significant risk?
Passive resistance. I think if you want to continue to be the operator to keep the lights on and not contribute to the moving the business forward, that passive resistance you will be replaced.
If you still report to the CFO and still worrying about cutting the dollars in order to do more with less, you're not necessarily engaging the organization in the way you should.
Exactly.
So CIOs are asked to support top-line growth initiatives while being asked sometimes to reduce or at least create effectiveness and operational costs. How important is that participation in the top-line growth? Like, is that 25% of the CIO's endeavor? How important is that list of things I need to do on a weekly basis? We'll start with John this time.
Well, listen, it's all tied to top line growth. I mean, at the end of the day, we have a lights on cost, which you are always trying to make better by adding more value, not necessarily cutting budget, but adding more value within what you have. Secondly, as we become more efficient and effective and remain competitive and meet our client demands for what they expect us to do, that equals top line growth. So what do you need to do? So a lot of times you can just drive what your clients are asking for as part of your innovation strategy tied to your objectives, because you have to listen and learn. And if we're ignoring them, we won't have top line growth. So I look at my job every day, I worry about top line growth and move it forward, move the meter forward, and be successful and help my internal peers be very, very successful.
Julie, do you want the CIOs to which you advise worry about top line growth?
Yeah. For sure. That's what success is. That's what makes it fun, actually, like to be in a company and to see to see that succeed in terms of growth and just getting into new products and areas. And the change is amazing. I mean, that's how I think about it, but that's not everybody. I think that there's an amazing contribution to be done top line.
I would add to that, Paul, like, do you want to be a great IT leader, or do you want to be a great leader that happens to run IT?
Right.
That's the change in thinking that you have to have.
And does the evolution of the CIO not just about external communication, but also internal involvement? You start going out with sales and having conversations as being a practitioner of digital. And here's a story, here's the drinking my own champagne story, and how that helps you determine what your champagne story should be, Mr. Client. That's interesting. Let's take it.
My CIO is very client facing. He loves that part of it. So, it's sort of, that just comes back to the thought leadership. If you think about certain actions the audience here can take away, one of them would be, how do you grow that network and learn what others are doing, like John's advice, so that you can think about what the right fit is for you and your progression. It doesn't happen overnight. So is it a course? Is it belonging to the IT media group, coming to these things where you can start to get those tips that you'll apply?
Let's take a different angle. What if the CIO is the pioneer? What if the CIO is ahead of the rest of the organization? You haven't been 30 years operating IT. Maybe you're coming from a different business, a different industry. You're full of energy and you're ready to go and you're ahead of the pack. How do you bring the rest of the executive with you? That's a different challenge than trying to convince them. Let's start with Julie. How do you handle being the pioneer as the CIO?
Well, the ones that when I've seen this happen, there's usually a pretty interesting excitement that's coming along right away. But when your first 30, 60, 90 days, when you're planning out being part of a new company, you're going to be having leadership conversations and understanding and deep listening to hear what's there. And then championing some of the ideas and showing where you're aligning with the business in order to convince others to change. Because you're right, that you could walk into an organization that is just dying, like, and really, really needs you, but humans are resistant to change. And so I think that having a plan that takes listening into effect again, so that people don't feel like you're going to bulldoze over their ideas or make massive changes without understanding the core of that business. You have to be somewhat thoughtful in it, but also be assertive in knowing an action plan that people will jump on and follow.
John, does pioneering require you to have a much better appreciation for the process of business casing?
Absolutely. I think the business, you have to understand the business case and the capacity of the organization, but also, when you want to buy a new car or a new blender, that's all you see after you think about that.
Right.
So as a CIO, you have to start planting those seeds, or articles, discussions, and all of a sudden what you're trying to pioneer, people start realizing it's out there. They see it, they hear it within their institutional knowledge, they hear it within their groups that they talk to outside. You can then start bringing them to other organizations that are non-competitive. Say, well, look, they implemented this, they did this. How do you feel about that? So we're all in sales. It's a long sales cycle around
Right.
because again, the pioneer gets the arrows, the settlers get the land. So you don't mind getting the arrows because your internal partner, they're going to win by this. So you have to always think that you're not winning, they're going to win. And by planting those seedlings, you can drag them through. And of course, there's always a few innovative people that you always target to do these small I innovations, which get a lot of attention, and other people want to start working on those small innovations. And then you get people cross-departmental wanting to work on it, they talk about it. So people chat about this stuff all the time. And you can't, listen, you can't stop 96% of the progress because of 4% of the people.
Right.
And you probably vetted the company. So if it wasn't 4% of the people, you probably aren't going to take the job, because you doing your homework, you would understand what that culture is. And if that's the challenge you want to take on, and some CIOs want to take on the meaty challenge with a culture that's 100 and whatever years old and maybe rough, but that's like exciting to them. And also, like, the CEO should be supporting you. You want to know what they're going for, and your introduction to the company. People expect that you've got the leadership support on board. Overall, it might not be totally true, but enough so that you should be able to start paving the way.
Awesome. We have time for one final question. We're going to be as optimistic and positive as possible, because this is a great question. Because of this widening skills gap that we just talked an hour on, the CIOs need to have different, better, more interesting, broader skill set. how do they obtain those? And even more specifically, technology is changing very, very quickly. If you have to keep up with technology and the innovation of those technologies, where are you getting that information? How are you keeping up? How are you being knowledgeable enough to support being the trusted advisor internally? Let's start with Julie.
You know, when I think about some of the things that I do and listen to, and when I ask my network what they do, there's so much content out there that you almost have to be a little bit thoughtful. And I'm not plugging this, but one day I was on the MIT site and there was a finance course for IT professionals. And it was a new course. And I thought, you know, that totally makes sense, because understanding what the CFO role is also changing, having an understanding of business strategy comes up to the numbers and, you know, what overall the goals are for the company. And if you don't feel comfortable in that area, know that there are courses out there designed for IT professionals so that you can have more of a finance flair in your conversations and understand what you're hearing when you are listening to earnings reports and things like that. And a lot of micro learning, like you can't always be committing to these big courses of things to take. So understanding what the podcasts are, what the micro courses are, and where you can learn the fastest through your network is sometimes the best way to go about it.
Nice. Final thoughts, John.
Yeah, listen, there's a problem to solve. You have to understand what the problem you're trying to solve, and then that information will come, and you chase the problem, not the solution. And then the solution will be presented in multiple facets to you. And then that's how you keep up. And then, of course, education, micro credentials, learning, listening, reading, it never stops in a good way. So
awesome. Well, that was a masterclass in 56 minutes. Amazing. That wraps up our time. I'd like to absolutely thank John and Julie. Hearty conversation, meaty like a fine stew. I hope there were a few, if not many, nuggets of gold that you can take back. I know that the IT Media Group will create some content to get back to you. And Nasheen, back to you.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. I'm still laughing at the meaty like a fine stew comment. But thank you, John and Julie and Paul, for that insightful discussion. And there's so much learning here. We're almost at the end of the session, and my apologies that we didn't get through all of the questions. Feel free to connect with the speakers on LinkedIn to carry on the conversation, because these events are as much about learning as they are about creating connections. The recording of the session, as I mentioned, and the report will be made available to you in the coming days. Please follow the IT Media Group LinkedIn page if you haven't already. If you're interested in high value and ungated leadership and CIO-centric content, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel if you're interested in tuning into our CIO roundtable conversations and executive insights interviews with top technology leaders across industries. And also join the community by subscribing to the VIP list. You will be notified of future programs. If you would like to get involved in our future initiatives by way of participating, speaking, or partnering, please drop me a line. I'm so grateful that you're spending 60 minutes of your Friday with us today. I hope this was a good investment of your time. I want to thank once again our panel, Paul, Julie, and John, for your insights. My appreciations to Pythian for your support. Thank you very much. From my screen to yours, have a wonderful weekend.